Well, we appreciate you sitting down with us today, Representative Brett Guthrie. You represent us here in Congress, this portion of Kentucky. First, how are you today?
Great. It's always great to be here in Glasgow. I just always have never failed to enjoy my time here, whether it's on the lakes or today with Highland Elementary School and being able to talk to them about the government and that's what they're studying in class. And so it's been interesting to try to put a face or a person with what they're studying in the books.
Sure. So you mentioned a little bit about visiting the area, and you've been in the area recently quite a bit, it seems. So talk first about what's going on in Congress, though. When you are in D.C., you're making trips there and here all the time.
Here back and forth. Well, the good thing is Glasgow's close. I live in Bowling Green. That's where I live. I live right off exit 26, so I'm close to here and easy to get here and have great friends here, so it's always a pleasure to be here. So what's going on in Congress? Well, the new Congress is just getting its legs under us. As you know, we had a little glitch getting started with electing a Speaker of the House. That is something that we didn't want to go the way that it went. Actually, I'm pretty close with Speaker McCarthy, and I've known each other. Matter of fact, when I was running for office the first time, he came through and campaigned. He said he wanted to help me win, but I think he wanted to see the Abraham Lincoln birthplace. But so we did some of those other things. No, he did. We've become good friends. And families have squabbles. And when you look at political parties as squabbles, he won by 216 votes. Speaker Pelosi won by 216. It usually takes 218. Some people pass. That's what dropped the number down. The difference is they did all theirs behind closed doors. Some of our guys like to squabble in the open, and so that's what happened. And what you hope, because you kind of look at yourself as a family, you hope that, okay, families squabble, and I've seen families that don't speak to each other, and I've seen families that have moments, and then they come together and say, okay, now we're a family, we've worked out our differences. That's where we are now. I hope that's where we continue, because we got a lot of big things to do this Congress.
Well, that is a good thing that you mentioned there. Talk a little bit about the Speaker of the House election firsthand. Watching that from the home front or across America, everyone's thinking, what are these guys doing? Like, why is it that way?
Why is it so difficult? That's a good one to explain because a lot of people, I guess if you're watching on some cable channels, they might have explained what was actually happening. So the difference is like in the Senate, when they pick a majority leader or minority leader, the party picks it. And so if you're like Senator McConnell has 49 members of his party, it only takes 25 of votes to become the minority leader. And the same with Steve Scalise. There's 222 of us. It just takes 112 votes to be majority leader. But the Speaker of the House is elected by the House of Representatives. So it takes a majority of the entire House. Of course, you're going to get 0 Democrat votes. I mean, they're not going to vote for a Republican Speaker of the House. We didn't vote for Nancy Pelosi to be Speaker of the House, so you don't expect that. But so we get together and we vote to nominate. So I think Kevin got 187 votes, and a guy named Andy Biggs got like 30. So those are some of the numbers. It might be 1 or 2 off on each side, but it was overwhelming. It was over 180 votes to somewhere around 30 votes. So Kevin was the Republican nominee. And typically, once you pick your speaker, that's what everybody votes for, and you move on. There were a handful of people that said they'll never vote for Kevin. And it only takes 5 in a 222, you have to 218 votes. And then there's another group that kind of formed that says, all right, here's an opportunity to push some of the things. And so we were hoping to get it resolved before we went to the floor. We knew there was going to be at least 4. And so all right, we got 4 that says they would never vote for Kevin. That number got up to about 6. And we came out, work out the differences. And for some reason, we had a couple of things we couldn't work out. Everything that ended up becoming part of the agreement to get votes for Kevin to be Speaker really was something that I supported. I mean, I want balanced budget amendment on the floor. I want all these other things. So, I just didn't mandate, I'm not going to vote for you, Kevin, unless you put a balanced budget amendment on the floor, because I knew that he would. But they said, we want it written. The things that Kevin said he was going to do, they wanted it written in the rules. And so what was interesting about it, there was still 6 that said they wouldn't vote for Kevin. But it's the majority of votes cast. So if you watch the end of it as they got to the 15th ballot finally, and I'll tell you why it took 15 ballots as well. The 6 passed or voted present, and if they had cast a vote for Byron Donalds, I think some of them were doing, then that counts. So if you got 216 for Kevin, 200 16 for Kevin, 200 and something for Hakeem Jeffries, and 3 or 4 votes from Byron Donalds, you still don't get the majority. But by them voting present, that didn't count as a vote. So there's 434 of us, 6 voted present. So 428 voted. So it took, 428 took 215, but Kevin got 216, which is the same number Nancy Pelosi got. A lot of people don't bring that up when they want to move on Kevin. And the reason there were 15 votes, we thought there would be 1 or 2, work out their differences and move on. You have to adjourn. I mean, and once you cast a vote for speaker and you go, so people say, why do you keep doing the same thing over and over knowing the same result's going to happen? You have to adjourn. And there were 6 Republicans who essentially handed the floor to the Democrats. There were 212 of them. And I will tell you, if the Democrats are doing what we were doing to ourselves, I wouldn't have voted to adjourn. I'd sit there and watch it. That's what show the chaos that your party's creating. And so, but we couldn't adjourn because it takes 218 votes to adjourn. And even the 6 Democrats who wouldn't vote for Kevin just wanted it to keep going that way. I think what they thought was, 6 Republicans, I'm sorry. I think what they thought was it was going to create a kind of a bandwagon that, all right, people are going to start peeling off of Kevin. And when it turned out that wasn't the case, and then you had the 14 or 15 that just, they really wanted in writing what Kevin said he was going to do. I trust Kevin. I knew we were going to do what Kevin said he was going to do, but they really wanted it in writing. Once those 14, I think it was, shifted to vote for Kevin, it was just a matter of time until the other 6 either voted for Kevin or did what they did. They voted present and let Kevin become speaker.
What are some priorities for you, but also for the whole Congress, this 118th?
Well, I'm really blessed to be the chairman of the healthcare subcommittee or the Energy and Commerce committees. Energy and Commerce is one of the bigger committees in Washington. I have the privilege of serving Energy and Commerce, Ways and Means, Appropriations, I guess we call the 8 committees, and have the chance to be, so all the healthcare, Medicare, Medicaid, public health, all the COVID stuff that we're dealing with comes through my committee. And so the bigger things we got to figure out, how are we going to support what's happening in Europe and make sure that our money's been spent the right way. We're going to make sure that Jamie Comer from this area, matter of fact, he lives almost as close to Glasgow as I do in Monroe County, probably closer. Driving time, I'm probably closer, but he's probably closer miles wise. He's going to be chairman of the Oversight Committee. We have Thomas Massey on the Rules Committee. So we're going to be doing investigations into what happened under Hunter Biden and the things moving forward. But the stuff that you really focus on what your committees are doing. You have your role for the country, but also your role as the leader of a committee to make sure you put good public policy for our conference and our colleagues to support. And so my big focus, we're going to do the debt limit. Healthcare is $1 trillion spending. And so we're going to have to deal with healthcare spending, looking at Medicaid, unwinding some of the COVID spending. That's what we started last week. President Biden sort of agreed we need to move down that path. For instance, if you show up at the hospital with COVID, the hospital gets paid 20% more than if you showed up with flu. And the reason for that was at the very beginning of the pandemic, hospitals were creating complete isolation wings. They may even have an empty side of the hospital before, if the COVID comes, we got a place for them to be. And so we needed to subsidize that action. Now people are treated like normal when they come in. People are still getting COVID, but people still go to the hospital, and you don't see these big isolation wings like you used to. So we want to unwind that. But so those policies we have to deal with. The big thing that's affecting everybody right now is what's going on with fentanyl. And we just had our first hearing. Our first hearing of the subcommittee was on fentanyl and fentanyl-related substances. Trying to get the Biden administration to do more, particularly at the border. So my committee has a responsibility for Food and Drug Administration, which deals with scheduling of fentanyl. So the criminal side of it and preventing new fentanyl sources from coming out. But the other side is the recovery side. We need to decrease demand for it. We need to help people get off of their addictions. And so we're going to be working on we call the Support Act. We passed it 5 years ago. It's made a difference in growing recovery centers. We need to see better results, quite honestly. And so we're going to look at the money spent, the recovery centers that have you see them everywhere, and that's a good thing in terms of access. But we want to make sure we get high quality in our recovery centers, and we have some good ones here in Kentucky. And lessons learned, and how do we apply them moving forward? Because one, we need to stop fentanyl. But we also need to understand that there's a demand for it, and if we help people with their addiction will decrease the demand but more importantly, get people back into society where they can live a productive life.
You mentioned a little bit of two of your colleagues in Congress that are from Kentucky. Out of those three, you seem to be probably a little bit quieter than the other two, Representative Massey and Representative Comer, a little bit louder just on the national stage. Talk a little bit about how, with this new committee assignment, chairing that committee, will we be hearing more from you as it pertains to that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think it's difference of quiet and loud. Those are, they're not very loud folks. It just depends on your committees and the role you have on your committees and what the cable news are covering daily. They are daily covering what's going on with Hunter Biden and Hunter Biden's laptop and the investigation of the ties to the documents and the classified documents in the president's home and other homes. And so that's under the purview of the archives, is under the purview of Jamie Comer's committee, and that's what's covered every day. So he's very proud. He's done a great job. Absolutely, I think a great job doing it. Thomas is the Rules Committee. We'll see, his profile on television. But I've done a lot more interviews over the last. I did several, Fox and those kinds of things recently. When we have a bill before us, like we had the Pandemic Emergency Act, you do a lot of TV. They get a lot of requests for TV. But what we're going to have to do, because Joe Biden is president and Democrat Senate, to unwind these public health emergencies and do these in law, you're going to have both sides work together. And a lot of times you don't get on television if you're just passing bills. But we have to get out and explain ourselves. Andy Barr, I think, was on today. He's on the China committee. We just created a select committee on China, bipartisan, to try to figure out our position with rare earth minerals. I mean, there's just so much that we've tied to China over the last 20 years, and now that President Xi is not moving China forward and trying to work with others, we have to change our strategy. We're running out of Trillions Tylenol because we have run out. Fortunately, we're past the peak because some of the natural ingredients don't come from China. And so we have to figure those kind of things out. And so you've seen him on television as well. And I think you'll see a lot of us because it's interesting. I think there was an article a friend of mine named Scott Jennings wrote, but, Kentucky's kind of punching above its weight with Thomas on rules. And who would have thought Thomas was kind of the bomb thrower a little bit when he was first in. It was funny. I think he did something that even made President Trump mad. And President Trump called him a third-rate grandstander. And Thomas ran with it, and he says, "I'm glad he didn't call me a first-rate grandstander." So he was even kind of owned it. But, he called him a third-rate. I think he wanted to say third-rate politician, but he called him a third-rate grandstander. And Thomas said, that's better than being a first-rate grandstander. And he kind of owned that persona. But he's come into where he's pretty good positions in transportation infrastructure, the Rules Committee. And that was some of the fight that for the Speaker is how do bills get to the floor? And there was some question. I've had people say, did Kevin give away the store when he agreed to put Thomas on the Rules Committee, a couple other guys on the Rules Committee that are, known to be a little more combative? Thomas isn't really that combative, but he's Thomas. and I would say, of course, anybody can watch this. I say if he's sitting here. But so what I thought, I said, that's fine. I said, I would rather us argue out bills in committee instead of having the fights on the floor like you saw. And when I say that, it's not that you don't want it in public. Committees are publicly covered, so everybody has the fight. But instead of just showing the world that you're like, can you not get your act together? We'll get our act together in committees, and then when we come to the floor, we're united. And I will tell you, Nancy Pelosi kept her group united, and they were effective. I mean, you may not like what they did, but they're effective in what they did and getting things done, and we need to be just as effective on our side. And you only do it if you stick together.
We see some of that even on our local level, too. Folks arguing that we should be having conversations in committees before we bring it to, even if it's a council meeting or, even at the state level. You mentioned a little bit about the pandemic being over, and that is something that's been covered widely this week.
Right.
So you've sponsored a bill that will end the pandemic emergency, and then out here on this other side, there's news coming out of the White House that the president's wanting to do this in May. Was that expected, when you were sponsoring this bill? What's the talk?
Well, it wasn't expected. We were hoping to put pressure to get to where we got. So we felt a big victory, actually, that the president may have ran in and around on us, I guess you would say. But my point is, if we get done what we wanted to get done, I don't care what happens. It's good for what's good for the American people is what I'm like. You want a good jobs report. I was watching today. I said you don't want to wake up and go, oh yeah, the president's not doing a good job. The country's in bad economic situation. That's not what I want. I want to say, well, I can criticize the president here, but the economy's growing in spite of that. That's what you want to hear. So with this, I will say we're not saying COVID is over. We still have COVID. COVID's probably going to be with us for a long time. But what we can't continue to do is govern ourselves like we're in a pandemic emergency. For example, under the emergency, it was actually declared by Secretary Azar under President Trump. So it's been 3 years. And there's things under the emergency that President Trump did. Emergency authorizations for the vaccines and therapeutics. They got vaccines out in years faster than people thought they would. Moving a hospital ship he had the authority to move a hospital ship off the coast of New York, so the rivers between New York and New Jersey so that they could help people. The Defense Production had to get respirators in place at the right time. And even, the first year of President Biden's administration, we laid off of it. But then last February, we said, okay, we can't govern ourselves forever in an emergency status. That gives a lot of authority to the executive branch that, quite honestly, Congress needs to have the check and balance and the oversight. And so we asked the administration a year February, send us a plan of unwinding this emergency. Because there's things that do hospitals still have. We do telehealth. So under the emergency, typically you'd have to go to the doctor for the physician to be paid for the visit. But we didn't want people who are doing routine health care to go to the doctor's office to be exposed to somebody with COVID, particularly seniors. So Medicare, particularly seniors. And so we said, okay, you can do your routine follow-ups telephone. And usually when you call the doctor, they don't get paid for that. But Medicare will reimburse the physician for doing routine follow-up. Those kind of things, we want to continue some versions of that. And so we said to the White House, roll out your plan. How do we unwind this? How do we cut red tape and got things done? So what do we want to keep permanently in place and what do we want to fix? So within the telehealth, there have been groups in everything. Groups across the country, particularly on our veterans, call us. And there's a couple of big scandals right now with Adderall, where these phone bank physicians that aren't local, they're not tied to this phone, but call out here and we'll send you a prescription. So we've had some telehealth pill mills that have developed. And we have to fix that. We can't let that continue. But the administration and their majorities in Congress like the extra power. So they let that and so Congress was kind of dealt out of having that. So as soon as we took authority, we said, all right, we want to unwind this emergency. We know we got to work together to do it. And I will tell you, when we were discussing my bill right before it came to the floor of the House for the vote, is when the White House announced that they're going to end the emergency May the 11th. That gives us time to figure out the compromises, or not necessarily compromise, but the things that we all agree we need to keep. We learned, and so let's keep them in place and not just throw the baby out with the bathwater. But there are special emergencies we need to bring back. And the best example, and the reason I wanted to move forward with this, was our General Assembly. If you remember, of course, Congress meets daily, is almost in permanent session, which is an issue we deal with sometimes, I guess, but the General Assembly is in session on certain occasions, certain time limit. And when the emergency happened and the General Assembly was in Frankfurt, the governor, whichever governor, has a lot of authority without any check and balance. And you saw the shutdowns, shutdown for Easter, those types of things. And so the General Assembly came together, said, there's times for emergency. We needed President Trump and President Biden, if he had been there, to do the Defense Production Act to get respirators. We needed those kind of things to happen immediately. And so does Kentucky. But the General Assembly said, you get this for 30 days, then you got to call us in. And you think about how it worked. We had the floods in eastern Kentucky. The governor responded to it and then brought the General Assembly. And we're going to spend hundreds of millions of dollars in eastern Kentucky. Absolutely need to spend them. But instead of one person making all the decisions, I think the 138 members of the General Assembly, along with the governor, working together is the best way to do things. And that's what we want to do as well. We don't want one person running the Secretary of Health and Human Services. We think the value of 435 members of Congress and 100 senators is important.
Another big line item here is the issue with China. That's ongoing. We've heard about it for months now with TikTok and trying to prevent that device on, government phones, things like that. Talk about a relationship with China and this most recent development with this, what we think is a surveillance device floating over the Midwest. What's the deal?
Yeah, as we speak, just so tell what I know now. As we speak, there is a device over Montana, and I do know that the House Intelligence Committee has been brought in to be briefed on what's moving forward with that. We need to protect our security and make sure China knows they can't put balloons over us. Without knowing any more details with that, it's hard to say exactly what I would do moving forward. But you look at China broader, what Kevin McCarthy wanted to do, and we passed a resolution that was bipartisan and had bipartisan members of a Chinese task force. If you think about, even in the 90s when Deng Xiaoping said, people are starving in China. This great experiment, they call it great experiment, I say, in communism where everybody's going to live in paradise, just absolutely isn't working. And so he started relieving some of the economy so that you could grow. And the problem is you have economic freedom, people want political freedom. And so Deng Xiaoping ruined that by his clampdown at Tiananmen Square. But so China tried to figure out how can we continue to have economic freedom without losing the political power of the Communist Party. They're not relinquishing any of that. They weren't relinquishing any of that. And it got to a point where they're going to have to, 'cause 1 billion Chinese came out of poverty. So if you want to talk about the Mao communist world, 25 to 30 million people starved to death. If you look at the relaxation and allowing market capitalism to come into parts of China, still under party control, 1 billion people came out of poverty in China. It's just amazing when you look at it. But now they have a leader that's putting his finger on that. He's clamping it down. He says, "I'm rather have my power than my people to have a better life." That's where we are. It's where we are in North Korea. That's where we are in Russia. It's almost hard for our mentality to say, President Trump went to North Korea, and I know he took posters or drawings of what Pyongyang could look like if they would just have freedom. And it was, a little more Vegas. President Trump was a little more glitzy than I am. But what he wanted to show is that the standard of living of people will increase if you just work with me. And that's not what these people are about. They're about power for power's sake. So what Kevin McCarthy has done is put together a bipartisan select committee. It's hard to get select committees bipartisan, but we have. Both sides want to deal with it to really look at the Chinese relationship and come back with policy proposals that we can deal with. We do know we have to bring back a lot of our pharmaceutical manufacturing. And a lot of people wanted to go to China because there were, 1.5 billion people in China. A lot of American companies wanted to deal with China because there's 1.5 billion people in China. Huge marketplaces for American corporate goods. But you can't deal with a country like that if you can't depend on them. And so if you have critical things like pharmaceuticals, chips, those types of things that are in the Pacific Rim, and you can't depend on your trading partner, you have to bring that back. And so those are what we're going to focus on. How do we get the stuff out of China back into the country? I think Wall Street and finance and big companies are going to have to look themselves in the mirror and say, do we really want to deal with the country? Even though it's 1 billion people and a lot of money, are we really going to deal with people that are the human rights abuses that they have? And we're going to point all of that out and let corporate America make their decisions as free citizens, or their decision makers as free citizens. But we just want the people to know what's going on in China. The Uyghurs are being abused. You got what's going on in Burma. Human rights abuses going on in China. And, it just kind of gets on our crawl, some of us on our side of the aisle, when you'll see, the Major League Baseball pull out of Atlanta, but they're doing deals with people in China. NBA is one of the biggest trying to move, basketball into China. It's a big market. Understand it from a business perspective, but it's absolutely, don't preach to me as an American when you're willing to do business with people in China that are, you can't compare the two. I mean, America does have issues. I'm not saying we don't, but we absolutely are exponentially, you can't even come up with a number how much better our society is than theirs, our government is than theirs.
And then lastly, to wrap up, the state of our economy. We're hearing that jobs are growing, our economy is strong is what we're hearing, but inflation is still a big issue. The federal interest rate continues to climb up. What is laying ahead for Americans here, your constituents that have their lives in their communities every day? They're seeing prices of goods that have gone up a lot over the last few months.
It has been frustrating for everything, and it's the supply chain. It's the money Congress is spending. That's the first thing that we can get a handle on. So first, with the job side of it, people were predicting a recession. Hopefully, if we have it, it's going to be soft. I hope we don't have a recession. The president's approval numbers go up and down with the recession. And I remember when there was difference with President Trump, I'd have people, President Trump's strong because the economy's strong when his approval ratings were high. And I said, well, are you cheering the other way around? I mean, I want our economy to be strong, and we'll deal with the rest politically. I mean, there's no joy in, see, I told you so. But with the economy, with inflation, a lot of it is directly related to congressional spending. We have to fix congressional spending. Some of it was these one-time big bills. I voted for the CARES Act when we had everything shut down in the country, but we still had money being distributed through the CARES Act, which was the dealing with COVID. And there was two specific more bills passed, the American Rescue Plan that just pumped a lot of money out into the economy. The other thing is, a lot of people criticize President on my side of the aisle, criticize Speaker Boehner, Speaker Ryan, but the 8 years they were president. So you have two sets of spending in Washington. One, you have what people pay into and they get back, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, people don't really pay into, but it's called entitlement spending. It's Social Security and Medicare aren't a program like Medicaid. People pay into it and they get it back. But those are kind of whoever shows up. When I turned 65, I signed up for Social Security and Medicare. So I'm 58 now. I'm not there yet, but that's the big growth of spending. But there's other things like defense spending, national parks, housing authorities. I mean, all the other things that Washington, that we appropriate every year. Under the Boehner-Ryan speakerships, that number in 8 years went down $10 billion. First time since after the Korean War. The domestic congressional appropriation bills we pass every year, spending went down. I'm not saying down over versus inflation, down. I mean, $10 billion. We're spending $10 billion in real money less than the first year Boehner was Speaker. In the last 4 years, 2018, so last 4 years, it's gone up $400 billion. And that's what we have to get our handle. That's the first thing we need to deal with. We need to sit down and deal with how do we get discretionary spending back under control. It was like every category's been plussed up, everything's been plussed moving forward, and there's a lot of pent-up demand because of us, but we're going to get to a point that we're not going to pay our debt. Right now, our service on our debt is as large as our military spending. So we're spending almost as much, it's not quite there, about $700 billion, military's a little over about $800 billion. So we're spending almost as much on our debt on previous spending than we are on current military. That's money that we could use to do things with, and we owe it to our children to do better, and that's where we're going to focus.
Well, we appreciate you coming in today, Congressman.
Thanks for having me.
Lots of information you've touched base on, and certainly a lot more we could talk about.
Absolutely. We'll be back.
Yeah, as always, we appreciate you for coming in, and have a great day.
Thank you. It's great to be here.